I'm part way through doing a oil change. What I did was to get the car up a little bit. I didn't want to jack it up and obviously for the back end to be higher than the front. So what I did was I've driven the car onto some of those offcuts that I talked about in another video of 6x2, some floor joists that I've got. Put those down in the garage, drove it up on top of it, just raised it up about 3 inches, gives me just enough room really to get underneath it to be able to take the filter off and to get a old washing up bulb underneath, which is perfect. Was large enough to contain the oil. Now I've measured the old oil off into empty containers, empty oil containers, because I've just done an oil change on my Integra. So I had a 4 from that and I had some empty 1 litres and got taken out approximately 8.3 litres. Now I know there's more than that in it, but I think there's oil cooler and lines and various other things. I think in total it takes about 11 litres, I think it is, or just over 11 if we were to completely drain every drop of oil out of the car. But obviously you're never going to get all that out, and I think if I take it to Porsche they just put it up in the air, take the filter off, take the sump plug out and let it drain, so they're going to get a similar amount. I guess I could have jacked the front of the car up, maybe I would have got a tiny bit more out, but 8.3 litres is what I've measured. So what I'm putting in is this, which is Q8 F1, which is a 1050, which I've read quite a few places it's recommended to use. So these come in 4 litres, so I bought 3 of them because I knew that it'd be over 8 litres. A few places I've read 8.5, some have read 8.9. I can't see that I would have got another 600ml out of this, but anyway, I've left it for about an hour and a half just dripping, and that's what I've got out. Now there's still some in, you know, it might have been another 200ml, maybe 8.5, but if you're wanting a rough guide of what it's going to take, the 3.6 is going to be somewhere around about 8.3 to 8.7, 8.8 litres I'd guess. So again, if you're buying something that comes in 4 litres, which is quite common nowadays, you're going to need 3 of them, but you're probably going to want some spare anyway, because most 996s are going to be using some oil, some more than others, as mine is one of those. Now I've been to Unique Porsche today to see Darren King, who was doing a Borescope on the car, so I'm going to do a little bit more about that later, but spoiler alert, I'm going to be spending a few quid. So there is problems, which I knew because of the amount of oil it was using. Even though it's been running fine, at some point I'm going to be doing a rebuild. So, but I kind of already got my head around the fact that I was going to be spending more money. So I'll just keep on filling this. So I've already put about 6 litres in. I paid just under 30 quid per 4 litres for this oil, and I believe there's quite a lot of the companies that rebuild who recommend putting a 1050 in, either existing cars on the standard, you know, on the original engine, and also on rebuilds. My way of thinking is that the higher weight or viscosity, whatever it is, maybe I'll use a little bit less oil. I'm not expecting it to be a lot less, but even if it helps to a degree, I mean, it's not ridiculous the amount that I'm using. I think it's using about 1.6 litres per 1,000 miles is what I've measured it to, and 1 litre per 1,000 miles is perfectly acceptable according to even Porsche, as well as specialists. So I knew there was something wrong. Right. So obviously I've put a new oil filter on. That's already screwed on. And like I say, just with a couple of inches extra, I managed to do this job no problem without being jacked up in the air. Now obviously if you can put it up on a car lift, or even if you wanted to put the car up on 4 axle stands, I guess you could do that, but I had very little problems doing this. All I did was I used this washing up bowl to capture what came out of the sump, and I used this stainless steel one, which I put underneath the oil filter when I pull that out, because obviously that's full of oil, to capture that. And this washing up bowl, which is probably 6 inches, I could get underneath. I cracked the actual sun plug, and then just using the actual hex drive, which is about 1 inch long, I could just undo it and just dropped it in, no problem. So if you're wondering whether you can do this quite easily without getting it up in the air, you can. Like I say, probably the best thing is what I've done to put it on. In fact, I think these are probably about 2.5 inches, these bottom wood at best. So just that little bit extra is all it needed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit for a good hour before I actually check the dipstick. Although I'm going to check the dipstick now actually, but before I check the dipstick to get a what should hopefully be a something like correct reading. It might not even be registering on the stick yet. Now it was quite, when I say it was low, it was probably about 1/3 on the dipstick before I dropped the oil. Okay, so that's already registering. About 80% up to maximum, which is surprising. Now why is that? So let's just check how much are in these, make sure they're not 5 litres quantity. No, 3.5 on the side, full up to there, it'd be 4 litres. So yeah, 4 litres. How weird. Okay, so I put 8 litres in it, and I think I've dropped. I measured it out, I've got 8.3 litres out. So whether this is just, it's still not settled yet, and where this dips into, it's still running into other places, that must be the case, because with my reckoning, I'm still going to have to put, if it was down to about 1/3 stick before I drop the oil, and I put 8 litres in now and there was 8.3 came out, I'm going to have to put probably at least 500ml more to get it to the correct setting. Yeah, so that's showing currently that it's on about 3/4 up the measure, so it's still settling, so I'm kind of wasting my time really at the minute dipping that. So I will leave that ready to push down, and put that so I don't lose it, and I will return to this later. Right, so work that needs doing. So did a Borescope today, took the plugs out. It had plugs in it about 2,000 miles ago. Plugs were fine apart from cylinder 6, which is the right hand bank, the one furthest towards the front, which is the problem. Normally, apparently, I think it's, obviously any of them can score, but 6 is very common, 4 is quite common, and I think 3, which is bank 1, the furthest to the front, is relatively common, but the most common from what I've read seems to be 6. So 6, the plug slightly pitted, nice grey, but still signs of burnt oil contamination, but not horrendously bad. 4, very slight, the rest of them absolutely fine. Cylinders 1, 2 and 3 have got light wear. I don't think he referred to it as scoring, just some wear, and I looked at the Borescope image when he was doing them. 4, I think he rated it as a 4 out of 10. Some light scoring, mild scoring, but you could see that it was the start of bore scoring. 5, I think that was a 3, 2 or a 3. Still, just some general wear and tear, I think, for 60,000, well, 61,000 miles now. And 6, I think he gave it a 7. That's heavily scored. I'm not getting any knocking, so he said, you know, you can carry on driving the car, it'll continue to use oil, but just keep your eye on it. You'll know by the sound of the engine when things start to get worse. But it was notably scored. He's going to send me the images, so if the editing software that I've got will let me do it right about now, you're going to be seeing an image on the screen that shows that. If not, then just take my word for it. It is quite badly, well, no, badly scored. Mileage wise, I'm not doing a huge amount of miles, so I think through the rest of the summer I'll probably end up doing 1,500, maybe 2,000 more miles, so which is going to total about 3,500 miles through this summer. Now obviously with lockdown it was limited. So strictly speaking, if I'm going to do 3,500 to 4,000 miles per year, because the car's going to be sawn for about 5 months of the year, next year plus the rest of this year could be somewhere between 4,500 and 5,500 miles. Now Darren doesn't have a crystal ball, and he said you could quite easily find that you can do that mileage and nothing much will change. You won't get any knocking, it won't progress much. The problem was going to be 6. Obviously that's the one that's going to get the we're going to get piston slap on first. So he said just keep your eye on it. Obviously if it starts smoking, because it doesn't smoke when I'm driving it, even running it, you know, revving it like 6,500 to 7,000 revs. My friend Phil, who's got a 992 Carrera 4S, he's followed me on numerous occasions, and he said you can smell oil but there's no blue smoke, it's not burnt, you can't visibly see it's burning it. So yeah, I've got a few choices really. It's all down to money of when I basically commit to spending that extra cash. Price wise, again, it depends, but I have basically made the decision that knees are hurting. Grab the camera. So I have made the decision that I'm not going to go for a Hardtech build, which I know a lot of people will say, oh, we should do Hardtech. I've done a lot of reading and research on steel liners, and obviously the companies that are selling rebuilds with aluminium liners are obviously not going to like steel liners. And I've read all the blurb and looked on Hardtech's site, and I've read in various forum threads and seen the pictures that they've posted of engines that have been rebuilt maybe 1,000, 2,000 miles or so earlier, and then have ended up in Hardtech for another rebuild due to various things, but the main problem seems to be the steel liner dropping, which straight away you would think, okay, then that's going to put everybody off using steel liners. But there are some extremely good poor specialists who have been doing rebuilds with steel liners for many years on the 996 without problems. One of them being Unique, and there's a couple that are down south which Darren told me about and which I'd also looked into who do the same. Now the one thing I've discovered is that the one thing that you read and people always say is the problem with steel liners is that aluminium and steel expand at different rates, which yes, I agree, and that is why they get problems with the steel liners moving, because the aluminium expands more and quicker, and when the engine gets hot or might get extra hot for whatever reason, if the car's been run quite hard, the aluminium expands more, the liner becomes loose and it drops. Now straight away common sense to me says, right, okay, then you can't argue with that, but there's been engine manufacturers and race engine manufacturers who've been building aluminium block engines with steel liners for donkey's years, and they work perfectly well and they're extremely reliable. So after doing some research and after speaking to Darren and the engineering company that he uses, and also these other two companies which I can't remember the name of, but they are very successful big aftermarket Porsche specialists, they send them to the same engineering company, and what they do, in short, just to put it into layman, you know, basic terms, is they machine out the old liner, which from what I can gather, let's just say it was 1 centimetre thick, the walls of the liner. I don't know how thick it is, it might be less than that, but they machine roughly half of that out, and then they interference fit a steel liner into the aluminium, into the block and into the bored out, let's say, machined out where the actual liner is. The difference being is, it seems, with the firm that Unique use and these other companies use as well, is before the steel liner is fitted, they bake the block. They basically heat the block up extremely hot, hotter than it's ever going to operate, and then whilst it's expanded to that rate, they then interference fit the actual steel liner. And I believe it also might be machined out slightly more at the top, so that in effect it can't drop. So the steel liner has got like a lip that sticks out more. So physically, I think that was the case of what Darren said, that so it physically can't drop anyway. But then the pressed in, which I believe that's what they call it, an interference fit. So it's basically like pressed in, and once it's pressed in, they machine everything flat, and then that's how it's done. And the thinking behind this is, which to me is extremely logical, is that if that's fitted with a block that's been baked hot, hotter than the operating temperature is ever going to be of the engine, then it doesn't matter what you do, that block is not going to expand beyond that, therefore the liner shouldn't move. And that is why these builds seem to be extremely reliable. And also another thing that I found after talking to a few companies who do this, one thing that they have noted is that when they've had rebuilds in, and other companies, I know that Darren was saying that when he was at Hartech, the one thing he didn't see was engines from these two other companies who use this engineering firm coming in for rebuild at Hartech, because the steel liner builds that they'd had obviously are reliable. There's plenty of other companies out there who are doing steel liner rebuilds which are cheaper, and these are the ones that seem to fail. Now, I'm not saying they all fail, and I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm sure there'll be other companies out there who are perfectly capable of doing a quality rebuild using steel liners. I'm only referring to these two that I've read about, and also Unique, who use the same engineering company to fit these steel liners, and doing it this way of heating the block when they put the actual liners in. And based on other research I've done, that's what I'm going to do. And also it's cheaper. And I know there's so much stuff that I've read about people saying, oh, the only rebuild you should have is a Hartech rebuild. I don't believe that. I don't think there's anything wrong with Hartech. I'm sure the work is exceptional. I think it's expensive, and in my opinion, and again this is my opinion, I can get a rebuild that is just as good for less money. And I think Hartech have developed their business in such a way, just like Apple for instance. I always said years back that Apple, I've never been an Apple user, but the Apple products were extremely good. But basically what Apple had achieved, which is extremely good, it shows fantastic marketing, and obviously it's built on success, is in effect being able to sell a £5 note for £10. And to a degree, I think that's the case with Hartech. I think if I went and spent 12 and a half grand, which is I think what I'd have to spend with Hartech to get everything done, I would end up with a great build. I'm sure it would be great, I'm sure it would be reliable, but it will have cost me a lot of money. I think I can save quite a few thousands having a steel liner rebuild, and personally I prefer the sound of a steel liner rebuild. I think it will be long term, I think it will be reliable, and I think also maybe more reliable than an aluminium rebuild, which other people do. And Hartech aren't the only people who do Nicocil liner rebuilds. There's companies in America, but I'm sure when these cars get to 60,000-70,000 miles, I can still see them ending up with scoring, because you've got aluminium liners, aluminium pistons with a coating on, and I know that, you know, a lot of very high performance engines, and I mentioned it in a previous video, I know on the Honda scene with the B series engines, when they turbocharge them, they do use like forged pistons and steel liners, I believe, and they get really big, like 600 plus horsepower out of these turbo builds reliably. So it must be possible to build a steel liner with an aluminium block engine and build it successfully to be reliable. So I think that's where my money's going to go. I'm sure there'll be lots of people who are watching this and shaking their head and saying that I'm wrong. Well, if I'm wrong, it's my money that I'm spending. But I think it's going to be, I'm 90% certain that it'll be Unique who will be doing it as and when I do it. And it's just really a matter of when I get the funds together. I don't want to borrow the money, I want to be able to, you know, go and get it done. So I'll either probably do it after Christmas this year, probably end of Jan, early Feb, before I put it back on the road again for summer, or I possibly, depending again really on how it goes and if anything else develops, I might run it next summer as it is and take it off the road at the end of the summer and get it done then. So maybe do it in, say, September next year. I don't know. We'll see. It will come down to money to a degree, because I think by the time I've got everything. Now, one good thing is that I've already done, well, not I've, but the car's already had a lot of things done to it. So it's got a new clutch, it's got flywheel that's been done in it as well, flywheel bolts, it's had brakes done, you know, there's lots of things. The RMS would be replaced anyway, obviously, when the engine comes apart. But there are quite a lot of things that have been done to the car already, so that's obviously going to save me money. One of the things that obviously I will have to do, and I'd be stupid not to, is get the heads rebuilt, because one of the possible reasons for some of this usage of oil was valve stem oil seals, and it could still be part of the oil I'm using could be due to valve stem oil seals. So it's only done 60,000 miles, 61,000, but it's 17 years old. So I think it costs, it's only 500 quid. I think it's £250 per bank to clean and reseat, relap all the valves, the valve seats, and replace all the valve stem oil seals. So I'll definitely be getting that done. And then another thing, again, which you can choose not to get done, but it would be silly not to, with the timing chain guides. I think there's 8 of them. None of them are particularly expensive. They vary, I think, between 40 and 80 quid a piece, but they all want replacing. I'm going to put new timing chains on there as well. That wants doing. I think there's the oil pump, and there's a scavenger pump, I believe, as well. They'll be doing. And then obviously, whilst it's apart, the crank, obviously I'm going to replace all the shells. You know, while the engine's out, it's one of the things you're going to do all the things, aren't you? One of the other possibilities, which I've got to speak to Darren about, will be increasing the capacity, because it seems that one option could be to put slightly overboard liners in there and fit it with the 997.1 3.8 litre pistons, which are a lot cheaper, it would seem. I mean, massively cheaper. I believe 996 3.6 pistons are something like 200 and, I'm sure he said 230 quid each, whereas the 3.8 997.1 pistons are about 73 plus VAT each. So big difference, and I don't know why that is. So, but I believe that all the crank, you know, lots of things are the same between the engines. So in theory, I think you could rebuild this as a 3.8 using those different pistons. I would have to get it remapped, so I'm going to look into that, and if the money's similar, I might go down that road. We'll have to see. Probably, let's put a percentage on it, 70% chance, yeah, 70 I'd say I'm going to rebuild it as 3.6, 30% maybe I'll do it as 3.8. Again, it'll come down to money. I want to do it properly. I don't want to skimp, but at the end of the day, once we start getting to, you know, 8k plus, then it starts to get obviously quite expensive. Long term, am I, other than the fact that's obviously spending the money, I'd rather not spend the money, but even if I didn't have bore scoring, the chances are that in a couple of years time I'd probably be looking, like for instance, I'd want to do the heads, and you know, I'd probably end up doing this work anyway, and spending the money if I'm going to keep the car long term, which I intend to. So I'm not really that bothered. I can keep running it for now. It's just using a bit of extra oil. It's not smoking out the back, and it's not knocking yet, so I'm just going to carry on as I am and just enjoy the car for now. I'm sure in the back of my mind, obviously, I'm not going to drive it as hard as maybe I would do if the engine was sweet as a nut, or as it will be once it's rebuilt and running. But I won't let it stop me enjoying it. And if it turns out that it progresses and I end up with the knocking starts, you know, I start to get some piston slap, then obviously I might have to look at getting it done early next year instead of waiting. But we'll see. It'll just come down to money and whether it progresses.